Right, let's get started. I find figure 39 interesting to put in perspective what I have been discussing during these lectures. The dashed line shows a constant growth rate of a little over 3% in real terms. This is a log scale, so the straight line means a constant growth rate, and you can see that going back to 1900, the United States economy has grown reasonably consistently at around 3% annually for more than a century. In the 1930s, you can see the big swing as the Great Depression pulled actual output below the trend line, and then you can see the movement above the trend line during World War II. But look what happened after World War II. We went right back to the trend line. There were recessions and booms and busts in the post-war period, but growth remained fairly close to the trend line. Now, if you look to the very far right, you see where we are today. We are below the trend line. There are debates about whether that decline is permanent. But looking at history, I think there is a reasonable chance that the US economy will return to a healthy annual growth rate somewhere in the 3% range. There are factors to take into account, such as changes in our population growth rate, the aging of our population, and so on. But broadly speaking, what this graph shows is that over long periods, our economy has been successful in maintaining long-term economic growth. I will say a few words about regulatory changes. In the last couple of lectures, I discussed the vulnerabilities in both the private and public sectors in the financial system. On the public side, the crisis revealed many weaknesses in our regulatory system. We saw what happened with Lehman Brothers and AIG, the effects of the too big to fail problem on our system, and more generally, the problem of the lack of attention to the broad stability of the system as opposed to individual parts of the system. There has been a very substantial amount of financial regulatory reform in the United States since 2008, and the biggest piece of legislation is the so-called Dodd-Frank Act. This legislation, officially named the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which was passed in the summer of 2010, was a comprehensive set of financial reforms addressing many of the vulnerabilities that I discussed earlier. Now, what were these vulnerabilities? One was the fact that there was nobody watching over the whole system, nobody looking at the entire financial system to spot risks and threats to overall financial stability. So one of the main themes of the Dodd-Frank Act is to try to create a systemic approach where regulators look at the whole system and not just individual components of it. Among the tools to do that is a newly created council called Financial Stability Oversight Council, FSOC, FSOC, of which the Fed is a member, which helps regulators coordinate. We meet regularly in this council and discuss economic and financial developments and talk about ways that we can look at the whole system and try to avoid various kinds of problems. Moreover, the Dodd-Frank Act gave all regulators responsibility to take into account broad systemic implications of their own individual regulatory and supervisory actions. And in particular, the Federal Reserve has greatly restructured our supervisory divisions so that we are looking now very comprehensively at the whole range of financial markets and financial institutions. As a result, now we have a big picture that we did not have before the crisis. I mentioned in my discussion of vulnerabilities, the many gaps in the financial system. There were important firms such as AIG, for example, but others as well that had no significant comprehensive oversight by any regulatory agency. The Dodd-Frank Act provides a fail-safe in that the FSOC can designate by vote any institution it views as not being adequately regulated to come under the supervision of the Federal Reserve. That process is going on now, so there will not be any more large, complex, systematically critical firms that have no oversight. Likewise, the FSOC can also designate the so-called financial market utilities like a stock exchange or some other major exchange to be supervised by the Fed and other agencies. So those gaps are being closed. We will not have the situation that we had before the crisis. Another set of problems had to do with too big to fail and dealing with firms that are systematically critical. The approach to dealing with too big to fail or systemically critical institutions is two-pronged. On the one hand, under Dodd-Frank, large, complex, systemically important financial institutions are going to face tougher supervision regulation than other firms. The Federal Reserve, working with international regulators, has established higher capital requirements that these firms will be subject to, including surcharges for the very largest and most systemic firms. Rules like the Volcker Rule, which prohibits bank affiliates from taking risky bets on their own accounts, will try to reduce the riskiness of large firms. Stress tests will be conducted. Dodd-Frank requires that large firms be stress tested by the Fed once a year and conduct their own stress tests once a year. So we will be comfortable, or at least more comfortable, that these firms can withstand a major shock to the financial system. All right, that's it.